here with awesome community members talking about Gender 101 for I'm Here, I'm Queer, What the Hell Do I Read? And I wanted to get a little input from you all about how being a person of color has shaped your experience coming out as a gender non-conforming person.
It's a loaded question, isn't it? I know, right?
Like, how do you think that perhaps, I don't even know. There's so many questions to ask.
Yeah.
Maybe we can start by identity-wise. How hard is it as a person of color to even identify as a gender queer? Because if I go back into sexuality, I never identify as certain identities because of the fact that I'm a person of color. Especially when I was younger, I never wanted to identify as a lesbian because somehow that for me didn't really connect because it wasn't part of my... I couldn't see myself as a lesbian. So now going to gender and identifying as a gender queer, it took a long time. Mainly because I didn't see a lot of gender queer, gender non-conforming people from the communities of color. A lot of my friends that identify as gender queer are actually white. White. So I never really. It was hard for me to come into terms with identifying as genderqueer because of that. Because I didn't feel a connection. I didn't feel like that was what I wanted to identify with.
And now, how do you feel about the term, or do you still feel the same, or?
I embrace it. For lack of vocabulary, I kind of embrace this one because I found a community that understands what it means for us to go through to a society that still doesn't get it, even within the queer communities. So through the struggle of figuring out, can I embrace that or not? Is it part of me? Is it something that I'm comfortable with? It became more of a necessity of finding people that really understood what it meant for me to be going through my gender identity. It was more of a survival skill, but that's how we build communities. So yeah.
And it sort of sounds like genderqueer was a more visible term that you were able to claim. Were there other terms that you felt connection to, perhaps, that are not as visible?
Well, if I were to go into my language, which is Spanish, unfortunately there isn't anything. So I decided to make up my own. So I could explain to my mom like what it meant for me to be genderqueer. So I came up with a term that is maribri. It's the hybrid of mariposa and colibri, a butterfly and a hummingbird. They both express very femininity and masculinity. Overall, they're beautiful and insects, creatures. So mine is the hummingbird and the butterfly, which for me is the creature that represents my fluidity of gender, and that's how I explained it to my mother. You see that the hummingbird and the butterfly, very feminine and very masculine at the same time. They're beautiful beings that people appreciate and people in our culture see as symbols of warriors and, tough cookies in our culture. So that was my way of explaining it and at the same time owning my identity through my language. I came up with my own term since it didn't really exist.
That's great. I love beautiful creativity.
Yeah. For me, in terms of being a person of color, I need to start off with my roots. I'm super proud of being Central American. I'm Salvadorian. So being Salvadorian and just understanding that's like a whole other construct and a lot of baggage behind that. If you really consider being someone that was raised here, being born here, but then still having a lot of stuff from back home, quote, because there's still attachment to that. But it's a society that, with being someone that has parents that are immigrants, that's another part of my identity. I'm first generation here. Being first generation here, they bring the stuff from home, and the stuff from home is a very structure of like, this is what male is and this is what female is and this is your role and this is what you have to do and you need to live it, learn it, and love it. And when you begin to really deconstruct that with just your behaviors and your mannerisms and the things that you choose, that's when you begin to see the struggle, and that's when you begin to find language for it. I began to find language for it at, maybe about 20 years old. I was just like, I don't want to be a mom. I don't want to, maybe I want to have kids, maybe not. I want to finish school. I don't want to get married. There's just a lot of things that were part of my socialization as a Salvadorian person, as a Salvadorian American person, that are supposed to mold my identity. And I'm not fitting into those roles. So not fitting into those roles provides me that space to really understand, like, well, since I don't fit into the roles, what are my options?
Yeah.
And those options, became understanding that there is a genderqueer community, there is differences, and that's only a term. Like, and that's the thing. Even when I brought up a definition before of what it was to be genderqueer, that term can be disagreed with. And even within the community, there are some people that don't agree with the word queer. It's something that's been linguistically reclaimed over the past 10, 15 years. It wasn't until the 90s that we began to see a reclamation of it with Queer Nation and a lot of other organizations that were really like linguistically reclaiming the term. So there's a history behind that. And, it's really about just not conforming to the socialized roles. I'm feminine by nature because that's how I was socialized to be, but at the same time, I don't necessarily want to put on this facade that, I'm obligated to have or I'm supposed to have. And then the language behind it in Spanish is structured male-female.
Yeah.
So deconstructing that is, do you want to go through an academic route so you have validity, or are you going to attach to your roots as someone that is genderqueer, which means that you are radical in some ways, that some people include being radical as synonymous to being genderqueer. And if you choose that, then you're creating your own language, which means that it's something that may or may not be carried down, or may not be adapted by the overall community.
And you were talking too about language and how Spanish nouns and adjectives are gendered in ways that in English they aren't.
Yeah.
Can either of you talk to sort of the struggle of having those sort of compulsory gendering of words and how they're directed towards you, and how do you cope with that?
I draw pictures. I just draw pictures because there's no way of, I think even with having, once again, with my parents being first generation here, I've definitely had to have been the bookkeeper. I went and paid the bills. I went and did all this stuff that, was just something that was part of my identity. And for me, the best way that I'm capable of explaining things is not even by using the language, but just using the language that I have, but then just drawing it. So it's like, not only are you hearing it, but you're also visually seeing it. And it's become a way of I think it's some ways a last-ditch effort, but it means it's actually worked. So, yeah.
I think for me, you had mentioned that I use that a lot. When I finish or when I write a word, I tend to go, since it is the words are feminine and masculine all the time, I end with arroba or at, which can pretty much, if you look at the image, it has like an A or an O above it. So it doesn't really need to mean one or the other. And in Espanol, I tend to go like that. Like when I'm feeling happy, I say I am content with arroba.
Yeah.
Because it has a both. And nobody needs to like freaking know what it means. Like I don't do it purposely for people to be like, hey, what do you mean by that? Oh, or what? Just for myself and my own sake, not for other people to see or get it.
So if I saw that word written out, like Latin, and then the arroba.
I don't pronounce it. It's only in written form. That's not when I'm talking to someone. That's when I write it down. So on letters, emails, or text.
I think with genderqueer identity, sometimes what I'm seeing is that there needs to be a transition from like being like an audio person to like being visual. And like that's why drawing pictures, that arroba sign, the at symbol is like a savior in terms of like
I don't have to explain it because you can see it.
yeah, it's like look, just look. Like,
it's just like
you know.
yeah.
Thank you, folks, so much for that.
You're welcome.